welcome back to Stories from the Ashes, where we pontificate on good books and the stories that define and refine us. I'm Amber, and I am here with Amanda, per usual, and our special, very special guest today, author Jeri Massi. Welcome, Jeri.
Thank you.
We are so glad to have you here. Your series, the Peabody Adventure series and the Bracken Trilogy, were incredibly influential to me in my childhood. They showed me that
Thank you.
women can be wise and strong protectors while completely retaining their femininity, and that they can be discerning, fierce protectors of the children who belong to them, and that they have their own work to do in the kingdom, quite literally, in the Bracken books, and that work can be more than just cooking and cleaning. And that it's important work, even if it's not flashy work that everyone is seeing. So they were doing a lot of behind the scenes work to save the kingdom. And as an introvert who didn't know she was an introvert, that was really a balm to my soul to know that I didn't have to be front and center all the time.
Oh, good. I'm so happy. It's wonderful. There were definitely some things I had in mind when I was writing them, but often readers tell me things that I don't think I was thinking about when I was writing them.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yes, yeah.
I
And
just,
answered prayer, yes.
Yeah, I loved the wise women, the older wise women who were there over generations and just were able to offer their wisdom and knowledge of the time. This is really funny, but it just popped into my head. We were buying bison from a local farmer in Iowa a few years ago, and he had worked with bringing the bison back into Yellowstone, and his girlfriend had been their wolf specialist for years at Yellowstone. And then when they retired, they started this little bison farm in Iowa. And he said that the most important thing was to not cull the herd every year, because you have to have the older bison cows, to teach the younger ones what to eat and when.
Right.
And that if you just have young cows, when the apples fall from the tree, they'll go and eat them and they'll get sick. And he's like, but if you have older cows in the herd, they will tell them not to eat them. He's like, when we have older cows, nobody eats the apples until the first frost. And then when the first frost hits and the starch turns to sugar, the older cows will take them
Oh,
to
isn't
eat
that
the
interesting?
apples. Yeah, isn't that amazing? And so he said they always leave the older women in the herd because they are necessary for the safety of the herd. And I just thought that was beautiful. And it just struck me that that's what I was seeing in these books, were these
The wise
older,
woman.
behind the scenes wise women who were protective of this family, this royal family in the kingdom, but behind the scenes, but they were keeping everybody safe and preserving the kingdom. And I loved the humility that was taught in those books, in The Bridge, especially with the young princess who is very headstrong and entitled at the beginning, and not even recognizing the sacrifices that are being made for her, and then recognizing them. Were those messages that you were?
Yeah, yes, definitely. Yeah. When I grew up in a very bad family, very dysfunctional family, very violent family. Um, and after I had started writing short stories at BJU Press, and I was, 22, 23, and I was having success. And I had written Derwood, and that was successful. And I was very sad that I was not writing stories to people like me, as far as I knew. I was writing stories to children who were in happy homes with good parents. And in my heart, I wanted to write stories to children who were going through things that I was going through. And so in the Bracken trilogy, that was where I had more freedom to depict the things that I had gone through. You do see in the third one, The Two Collars, what Kriya suffers was much closer to, what the doubts I had, the fears I had. But in the Bracken trilogy, yes, I wanted. I don't know if you know, I am now a fourth degree black belt in Taekwondo. I don't practice anymore, but at that time I was still working towards being a black belt. But I wanted to depict that a woman not only could be, but should be intelligent, capable, able to meet any situation with wisdom, which sometimes is. There are one or two places where the wise woman just, Aikido flips somebody down a trail. And I did want that. And I wanted to show that this is a person, yes, who ages, but age was not necessarily a weakness. Although, again, in the third book, you do see that she dies. I mean, she's older and she dies. But it was very important to me later. I found out later there were children who had been abused who really loved the Bracken trilogy. And that it's sort of like I was praying back then. I would tell the Lord, I'm tired of writing for children who have perfect families. This isn't what when I said I would use my gifts for you, this wasn't what I had in mind. And um, I was very sad about that. I thought I'm never going to be able to reach children who went through what I went through, and they're the ones who really need these stories. And then later discovered that I had reached children like that, and these stories meant a lot to them and really helped them. And that is really an honor. I feel like God gave me an honor in doing that. That was a just an honor to do that.
So
Yeah.
I have a question about your Peabody series, though. So
First, I would like to say I'm very sorry that that was your experience growing up, and
I'm
thank
sorry,
you,
yeah, for you too as well.
thank
Yeah,
you for sharing
it
that.
makes you what you are, but yeah, no happy memories really. Yeah.
Yeah.
the Peabody series, it features a blended family.
Yes.
So when you were writing that, were you trying to, write outside of the stereotypical nuclear family? Did you have experience with that
Well, BJU
yourself?
Press, like all religious publishers, they have a box. They've got this box, and it has to have good, wholesome stories for children. Which means the parents are always happily married to each other. The kids are happy in the family. They had this box, and so from the time that I went in there, I would say to them, the purpose of preaching is to bring souls to Christ. That is not the purpose of fiction. In fact, you can argue from the Bible, you should not use a novel to bring somebody to Christ. That is actually the role of preaching. And Christ, in his preaching, used little micro fictions, the parables, but he never used them to bring about conversions. He used them to explain certain parts of what he was saying, but I strongly believed if you're dealing with children who are professing to be Christians, you do not need, especially one after another, these stories where a kid gets saved at the end of the story. And I said, this actually cheapens salvation. We don't want to have a cheap view of salvation. And I will say, to their credit, the more I spoke and the longer I spoke and pulled out Bible verses and doctrines, they actually did. Jan Joss was the person who I reported to. She has died since then. And she was really a very well read woman and a great educator, and she loved children's literature. So we all started they did with me often giving input. We started looking at ways to we can be in the box, but we're not in the box. But we had people over us who were going to insist you got to be in this box. And so that was but yes, it was definitely intentional. I didn't want one more happy, and I didn't think I could write one more happy family or a happy family story. I'm not sure that any stories that I wrote there were some short stories I wrote that were happy family stories, but usually I showed some divergence from that and still showed young people who wanted to do the right thing, because I did encounter also prejudice when I was at Bob Jones University. There was a very rampant theory at that time that if you had been abused as a child, you were going to be an abuser. And if you had come from a broken home, you were more likely to divorce your husband. And actually, we know, from the data that we have seen from the metrics from Bible colleges, it doesn't make any difference. Half of their graduates divorce. I mean, and it doesn't make any difference what their background is. There is a fallacy there called the ecological fallacy, which I won't bore you with. But let me just say that theory that if you are abused, you will abuse has been thoroughly disproven, and it's based on a faulty premise called the ecological fallacy. So they let me go as far as they could let me go. But all through those stories, I was always pushing, wanting something different. But I was very pleased. They did agree. I did not have to write stories that would end with the child getting saved. And I was glad. I wanted to write stories about children who were Christians, who are growing as Christians, and I wanted to show their growth as Christians.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I just
Yeah.
finished the Derwood Inc., the first book in the Peabody series, and I did really appreciate that It showed Christian children just living life normally. I appreciate books that show Christians living as Christians without some big spiritual thing. Like it doesn't have to be all have this spiritual peak to be
Right.
a good
Yeah.
book. It can just show that there's value in living faithfully without having to have this emotional high
Right.
all the time.
Yeah, well, and the way that I don't want to peak the mic, so let me lower my voice. The way that the Lord works with us, we tend to go a long time and things start building around us, and then we come to a crisis point of realization or an epiphany, and that happens. Certainly, that's such a big part of growing up. That's where growth occurs with children, and that was something that I wanted to show. Just that, and I wanted to do more. I wanted to show Jack and Penny fighting with each other, Jack lying to Penny, and I have to tell you, Derwood was a process of a lot of stuff being culled, and then I would have to rewrite it. Derwood began with the Ladies Auxiliary Missionary Fellowship annual luncheon as a short story that they really liked, and they really liked the comedy. We did all agree that one problem with Christian fiction is there's no comedy. So one thing they really liked with the Ladies Auxiliary Missionary Fellowship annual luncheon story was there was comedy, and it was going to begin the fifth grade reader. It was going to be the first story in the fifth grade reader. And then as they were talking about this novel program that they wanted to start, they wanted something that would be new and fresh, and a lot of Christian fiction is pretty downbeat, and they wanted to continue this incredible. And we had, Del Thompson, the greatest illustrator I think I've ever seen. I think he's better than anybody at Disney. I just think Del Thompson is really the greatest illustrator I've ever seen. And we've had Del Thompson, and then we had Dana Thompson, who was so great at comedy art. He was just so funny. So Jan Joss came to me and said, do you think you could change the Women's Auxiliary Missionary Fellowship annual luncheon story to a novel? And, I said, at that time, I could do anything. At 22, I could do anything. So I said, sure, let me just work on this and put together a storyboard. And if you've read Derwood, you notice it seems to fall into two parts. There's the mattress store part, and then there's the bootlegger history part. I wrote the first part and put everything into it, and then because this had to be used with their reading program, there were actually teacher manual lessons on it. They needed to have a certain number of words. I forget if it was 50 or 60,000, and I wasn't there. And they said, you have to make it longer. And then I told them, well, the surest way to ruin a book is to inflate it. And they knew that. These were people who were very professional. Jen Joss, Joe Hall, Jim Davis, they were very, very professional people. So they agreed. So the only thing we could think of is that I would have to add a piggyback story onto it. And so then I wrote the second part, which I don't think is nearly as strong as the first part. And so that was how we did it. That was how the book was built. And that was what we did. But yeah, I didn't realize until I wrote it, a lot of humor is based on deception. A lot of humor is based on one of the characters doesn't know what is happening, but the reader knows what is happening. And that's where you get the joke from. You're watching this person. So it's really based on one character lying to another, and you know the truth with the one who is lying. But Jan Joss said, absolutely not. We will not put that in this book. And I think there was one place where Jack lies to Penny and gets in trouble for it. But yeah, so that made the story much more slapstick, because originally a lot of it was Jack lying to Penny and getting her do stuff, and then it would come out and he would get punished. But the powers that be over me said no. And just this, for people who want to write books, this is the process. It would be wonderful if we could all write a perfect book and hand it to a publisher, and they would say, well, yeah, thanks, publish it. But it never works that way. BJU Press probably commandeered more than other publishers would, but they had a very specific vision, and BJU Press has a very, very picky audience. The audience is extremely picky, and in a heartbeat would drop BJU Press books. And so we did, in a lot of ways, had to comply with our audience. So there were times we stood up against them, and I wrote a whole lot of little one-pagers to send to people who complained about animals talking. That was the big one. And any stories where animals talk, we would get all kinds of mail about that. Animals, it's demonic, it's satanic, And so I had my ready-made, here, send them this. And we did that. But it was in religious publishing. I think any religious publisher in any religion walks a tightrope with reader expectations, and then what genuinely will be interesting to readers.
Yeah, there's a lot of different variations in even within denominations, so trying to find something to fit everybody is a real big challenge.
Right. We never had a book that mentioned baptism. We didn't. That was nowhere in the
Yeah.
books. Never. Yeah, we never even touched it.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think so. You said that the second part you think is weaker in Derwood Inc., but Aunt Irene was my favorite character of all of them, and she was in that second part.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. Good. Thank you. Okay.
And I just felt like I was getting a 2-for-1, 2 stories in one book.
Oh, good. Well, I hope all my readers think that. I do. I hope they.
Really good value.
I took a lot of pains to develop it, but it was a little difficult because it had to be a full-blown mystery, but we couldn't go too far over our word limit either. So it was like I had to write this full-blown mystery, I think in like 10,000 words, and that was challenging. That was a challenging thing to do.
You can see if you're watching this that the spine for Derwood is thicker than the other books in the series. So it does have that 2-for-1 feel. But I really liked the character of, the characters. I think my 2 favorite characters. So I liked Jack and Penny for being funny, but I really liked the relationship building between Scruggs and Jean. And I really felt that it spoke to the whole concept of friends or the family that you choose for yourself. And Jean was somewhat of an outsider in Jack and Penny's relationship, right? Like the younger sister and
and the goody-goody. Yes.
The goody-goody and not the glue that held, their little pod together. And then Scruggs being from a broken home.
The bad boy. Yeah.
The bad boy, the bully character, and having experienced loss of his own, just really connecting with Jean and just I thought their friendship was one of the most beautiful, and it really did. Like, I had this firm belief as a kid that I could choose my own family and my friends as I grew, and I was really blessed in that way. So many of my friends' parents completely opened their homes to me, and I've spent so many holidays with different families that just took me in and made me feel like part of the clan. And actually, Eric, my husband, did not let me meet his parents until after we were officially courting, because he had watched me become so close with everybody else's parents. And he's like, parents love you. He's like, if my parents fell in love with you and you didn't fall in love with me, I would not be okay with you. So he waited until we were already a sure thing, and then I got to meet his parents. But I feel like this book was really encouraging to me that was the case, that you're not just bound to your blood family. And, and it wasn't a bad family for Jean. Like, Jack and Penny were good siblings, and she had good parents, but Scruggs needed somebody. Scruggs needed to be able to, like a, puzzle piece, click into a family, and I felt like Jean was his in.
Well, there is another Peabody book that BJU Press did not publish that I published called Hall of Heroes, which is a comedy. I don't know if you've read it or not, but Scruggs and Jean Jean tells the story, and Scruggs features prominently in that. And that book has been controversial. After the 6 original, I was still working for BJU Press at the time, but I believed that I had tapped pretty well the middle school ethic, and I was ready to move on to young adult. And Hall of Heroes is a threshold book, taking the reader. There's a lot of comedy in it, and in fact, I think my funniest comedy is in Hall of Heroes. But there's also a really serious, very serious story in it where there's not going to be a happy ending for one person. It's sort of a story with 2 endings. One is happy and one is not happy, and actually, my plan was to write all the way through high school. And I was going to have Scruggs and Jean eventually get together. There would be a middle point where he would realize he was too old to be this close to her, and he goes off on his own. But in the last book, she's old enough, and they do. I even had it worked out that he's trying to rebuild a dilapidated shack into like a little home, and they sort of fall in love as she will come by and talk to him. Well, he knows he's in love with her. And, I wanted to do that. But Hall of Heroes, when I wrote it again, I pushed the limits too far. And that was where we really could not agree. They wanted me to go back and keep writing the stuff I had written. And I honestly believe before the Lord, that was not a good thing to do. And we argued, and they wanted me to rewrite Hall of Heroes, so I rewrote to their specifications, and then they still rejected it. And it was at that point that I realized I've really done my time here at BJU Press, and I need to go, and resigned. I think it was probably 3 months later. Probably wasn't right on the spot, but I resigned soon after and launched out on my own.
So which version did you publish? Did you publish the rewrite that you did for BJU, or did you publish?
I went back to what I had. Anytime anybody gives you comments on your book, on your writing, you really got to listen to them. And this is what young people say: how do I write a book? You get your friends to read your book and you listen to what they say, and then you make changes. Mm-hmm. That is so important, to never criticize a friend's critique of your book. If somebody's willing to read your stuff and critique it, then just listen to them and never contradict them. Because there were things I would get in critiques where I didn't agree with it and I wanted to go do it my way. But probably 80% of what I got in critiques in terms of style, language, what was funny, was valid, absolutely valid. And my books were better because people critiqued it. But with Hall of Heroes, we had a very sharp philosophical divide, that there is a character, a missionary, who is dying of cancer, and she has rejected the use of narcotic painkillers because she wants to know death. She wants to experience Christ in death. And they were very offended by this. And I did bring to them real life people who had made that decision. John Wayne, he didn't want to know Christ in death. He just didn't want to be, under a narcotic. Mm-hmm. But there were people, and they said, well, she has to write, she has to say things that show that other good Christians do take narcotics in a time of death. And so I did. I wrote that in, and I didn't take that out. I had her say that because I thought, some people are wacky enough that now they're going to think I'm saying, or they think it is true, that everybody should do without this. And not everybody has had her experiences. So I did leave that in, but I still, in the end, I made it clear. She makes it clear she does not want narcotic painkillers. She was taking painkillers, but not narcotic painkillers. This was in the 80s when painkillers were far less refined. But I wanted that. And some people have criticized the book for being deeper life. Like, this is too much of a deeper life book, which maybe, I don't know. I think I told you I have a mass on my liver now that we're being tested. I'm going to find out the hard truth, I think, in a few months, or I might find out the hard truth. But I don't know. We'll have to see. We'll just have to see. But I think I wanted to make it clear it's a Christian's right to choose for themselves their manner of death. And Scruggs and Jean are involved in this story. But again, this sounds like such a grim story. There was a lot of comedy in the story. Mm-hmm. But that was the breaking point, probably between me and BJU Press, was that book. Like, I felt like I had this gift and I could write, and I did not want to write what other people beyond a certain point. I couldn't write what other people were telling me to write. I believed I needed to write in good conscience before the Lord. And that is the struggle in the book, doing what the Lord tells you versus. So that was where we broke. But Hall of Heroes is out there, and you can read it. And I hope people do. I hope everybody watching this podcast buys a copy, or 10 copies. That would be good too. So. But it didn't get the notice that the other books did because it wasn't part of the BJU collection.
Right. Mm-hmm. I did buy it when you told me a couple years ago that you had written it. Oh. And I read the first couple pages, and I didn't think that the Jean it was talking about was my Jean. And so I was like, I can't wrap my brain around there being two Jeans in the same town. So now that I know that it is my Jean and that Scruggs will show up.
The first time I released it, they still owned the rights to the Peabody series. So the first time I released the book, everybody's name was changed except Jean.
Okay.
So it was a different Jean. But now in this release of the book, well, if you want to read the current release, just email me your address and I'll send you an author's copy. And you can read that. Maybe you'll find that more. Amanda, I'd be happy to send you guys author's copies and see. Okay. And again, I hope you like it. Some people have told me, Linda Samaratini, who is a writer of Christian fiction, she told me she loved it. she noticed that it was definitely a step in an older direction than the previous books. And she loved it, but I just got a really bad review on it where, Guy just hated it and said it was deeper life, it was drivel, it was nonsense. And, so I'm going to have more well-read people read it and tell me what they think.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely read it. And I love hearing Jean and Scruggs' end story that you had in mind. And that was what I'd always hoped for them. But at the same time, I really appreciated the fact that you had this mixed gender friend group.
Yes.
And people weren't just falling in love with each other and having
Right.
crushes
Yeah.
left and
Right.
right. And
I
I
want
think
to
that
avoid that. Yeah.
that's so valuable in Christian circles to show boys and girls can be friends.
Yes.
And boys and girls should be friends because we are all part of the body and we're told to treat each other like siblings, and siblings are not objectifying each other. And so so if
Or
you're objectifying
discounting each
every
other.
person that you come into contact with, then there's a problem. And so I really liked the fact that they were all just able to be friends going through
Yes, a
life.
happy gang of friends. Yeah, well, I grew up, I grew up in a very abusive home, and the boy across the street, Bruce, actually looked out for me. He was 1 year younger and probably like 50 IQ points smarter. He was so smart. He became the chess champion of the East Coast of the United States. And
Oh,
he was real smart.
nice.
And he was very gentle. He was Jewish, very gentle friend. And we stayed in close contact with each other through grad school for me and never did anything that was, as he says, not praiseworthy. This is a guy who at 13 or 12 was looking after me, knowing I was being abused. What a wonderful, honorable person he was and is, So, yeah. So, but all that to just say, I had a very good friend, Bruce. We were friends all my life. We're still in contact with each other, and we never did anything that was not praiseworthy or honoring to God. And so, yes, I did. That was something I did want to put into a Christian book, that not every book is a romance. Not every relationship is a romance. And we all do get something from the person of the opposite gender, that we are complementary. And even in a friendship, that really strengthens the bond, that you both come at it with different perspectives.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was important.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point for books, is not every relationship is a romance.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
It's hard to strike that balance between there is a time and place for romance, and that certainly is God honoring, but not everything has to be about romance.
Yeah, and never in my books. There was one thing I was never going to write: romance, and I really don't. So,
Yeah.
The other message that I really liked from the Bracken trilogy was that, and I think this can fall into the abuse background and the troubled homes and everything, is that females can rely on their own wits to take care of themselves when their assigned protectors have been removed. And I think that that was just like a really solid theme that I was seeing. Like, the princess had protectors, right? Like, she's not just a princess running around willy-nilly, but she had protectors. But then there are situations where those protectors were removed from protecting her and she had to rely on herself, and she couldn't just lean back on her laurels and say, well, I'll just be taken care of because I'm the princess. And so I appreciated that. And I'm not going to say which book or what happens, but in one of them, when the protectors are assassinated, I cried so hard, like every single time I read that book. And my mother read that book aloud to me the first time, and I couldn't even understand what was happening because she was crying so hard.
I want to tell you, I cried when I wrote it. Because that character was definitely one of the most lovable characters that were written. And it's not like you say, I'm going to create this lovable character. You just start writing the character, and at that time he was like a person to me, and I was exploring his personality and showing his personality. But at that time in my writing, characters just came full blown in my head. It wasn't a conscious, so I knew what he would do, I cried, and I thought about it a lot before I wrote it. Because once you put pen to paper, he dies, and
Right.
But I tend to think that particular book. Well, I don't know. Each different book has its strengths, but that one probably is, just in terms of the story, is probably the strongest story, with the most vivid characters. But each book in the trilogy is doing something different.
Yeah. They were really good. Which one did you write first? Were you writing them
I wrote them in
simultaneously?
order. I wrote the bridge when Del Thompson, in the third grade reader of the BJU Press books, and I don't know if this story is still in there because they are renewing their stories. There was the story of Esther in the third grade books, and the artwork was so stunning. I couldn't get over that artwork. How reading this and looking at it just like slayed me. And I wanted to go talk to Dell because I didn't know Dell. I hardly knew Dell, and I was like, "This is the most incredible artwork I've ever seen." And I told Jan I wanted to write a book that had artwork like that, and I wanted it to be like a picture on every left-hand page, and I wanted it to be a simple story, and I wanted Dell to illustrate it and illustrate it the way, and I wanted it to be a fantasy with the beautiful garments and the horses, and all that, and I wanted it illustrated by Dell the way he had illustrated that. And Jan said, "Well, go ahead and write the story." And then when I wrote the bridge, they just told me, "We don't have the money. It's very expensive to produce a story like that. We don't have the money." And then Stephanie True ended up being picked as the artist and not Dell, and which Stephanie True is a really good artist. In that story, though, I thought Dell would have been the better choice. Stephanie did a good job. Well, she did a good job with the horses, especially. Horses are hard to do, and she did do some great horse drawings, which now in the new copies, let me remember, these books have gone out of print, and I have purchased the rights. So this is what the bridge looks like now. And it does have interior artwork, which I cobbled together from free sources. So none of the books, unless you have the original books, the artwork that we're talking about is from the original books, and you won't, apart from Derwood. Derwood has Del Thompson's original illustrations, but BJU Press would not let me take the artwork from the other books, and that is what's holding up publishing the rest of the Peabody series after Derwood. You have to have, it's a standard. But anyway, let me talk about the Bracken trilogy first. So I did the bridge first. And this, again, we had so many customers of BJU Press who thought fantasy was evil and fantasy was satanic. So if you really look at the bridge, there's no magic in the bridge. There's this ancient secret that they are like, they're not even really unraveling it because the wise woman knows what the ancient secret is, but you discover that this anthem that they sing all the time is actually telling you the ancient secret. And then they go and they do this. And that was kind of like the first step into doing, and we couldn't even call it fantasy. We had to call it fanciful fiction. And so then they said, the bridge did very well when it first sold. And they said, well, do another. And I wanted to do another, so it was more, I said to them, "Can I do another?" And they said, yes, very heartily. And so then I still, I wanted to keep the wise woman and a woman, a little princess, and did Rosamund, who is more disobedient, but it's always in retrospect. You look back and you see that she drew mustaches on the color plates of and that was much more, that was closer to what I considered at that time a typical sword and gown fantasy story. But again, there's no magic. There's other races, but there's no dwarfs, there's no trolls. Right. You might look at certain characters and say, that would be a dwarf. And right. And here's the new cover is this of Crown and Jewel, again, cobbled up. And then I actually had, this is what surprised me pleasantly, was that many of the young people reading these stories did artwork. They built models. They built model castles. And they would send me photographs. So then for Crown and Jewel, I did do a contest. I think it was $100 and 10 copies of the book to whoever could do a cover. But anybody who did any artwork, I just put it into so we have the Crown and Jewel fan art edition, which I thought when I sell this, 15 people are going to buy it. It's going to be the 15 people and their family. But actually, it sells pretty well, the Crown and Jewel fan art edition. And then I still wanted to do something for children who had been through what I had been through. And then the two collars is really definitely, yeah. And here it is in the new, this is the new version. Oh yeah. And that's there's that Stephanie True's version. Oh no. What Amber shows is Stephanie True. What Amanda shows is an interim version that occurred when some of the artwork was destroyed by water, and they got young artists to to do pictures for the books. But if you look at the two collars, that is definitely a story about sanctification and our preservation in Christ. And that's really clear. I mean, if you understand the doctrine when you read it, you see that is what it is about. And again, it's a little grimmer, or a lot grimmer than the previous two, but reader, it's probably the least selling, and that will happen at the end of a trilogy. Most of your sales are the first book, then the second, and the third. So I have had, again, the best reviews come from that book, or by people who get it and they really they like this, that here's a book for children that's not hitting them over the head, it's not guilting them, it's not asking them for a decision, but it is showing them this is the doctrine of belonging to Christ. And so there is I guess a smaller group of readers that like it, for that purpose. Well, I got PTSD and I lost the ability to write fiction. I can't write it anymore. And I am trying. So I did think of a sequel to the Bracken trilogy that is actually The Wise Woman and a Prince, where he's a little prince, and actually his parents are a couple of real fops. They like being royalty. They're into, and he's just this dreamy, off-the-wall little kid, and so they decide they're going to have to send him to the royal boarding school, like all the wealthy rich kids go to this. So they send him out in the yard, and meanwhile, the fishermen who live like a week away are coming with the season's load of fish, and they come up in their wagon, and they unload the wagon, and they pull around to get paid, and the little boy is sitting there with his suitcases, and he says, I'm supposed to go with you. And he hands them a note. And the note says, here's the money for the next blah, blah, blah. Please take care of him, blah. And they say, well, isn't that strange? Well, okay, get in the wagon. And they leave with him, and they take him off to their little impoverished fishing village. And they keep wondering, why don't the king and queen come and look at, but the note says, we want you to have him for a long time and try to make a man out of him. So they think, well, we're only 10 now. So they teach him how to fish and how to do this. And then marauders come and overrun the village and kill most of the people. And he and several of the people escape out into the fields, and they have nothing. And that's kind of where it stopped right now, is how do they get the upper hand on the marauders? But it's in there that the wise woman comes in, and that, and that's kind of how the story turns, is that he actually becomes really the man that his father is not. And they, not only do they defeat the marauders, he and the survivors go back to the palace to say, these people have learned to navigate. It's not just a slave trade. If you remember, in the original trilogy, there was a slave trade, and they're saying it's not just a slave trade anymore, or it's not a contained slave trade. These people are going to come and they're going to attack us and overrun us, and they are fierce. And ultimately, like, the king doesn't want to handle it, just doesn't want to handle it. And so the prince actually sort of becomes like the hero of the people. But given the state of my mind now, I haven't even put pen to paper. I wrote the first sentence because I told myself I am going to write this. I'm going to try. So I wrote actually the first line. And to me, it sounds like it has all the makings of a great story, but I don't really have that engine in my head anymore that can do it. But I'm trying. I am trying, and it's on my mind. So if I don't know if it's God's will or not. So I don't know what to ask you to pray. But if you're moved to pray for me, I would say, yes, please pray for me. But I want to do that.
And this block is some PTSD. Is that what
one doctor said that he thought it was just a function of getting old. He said that your mind changes, your brain changes, and it could just be that you're older now and your brain changed and you're not able to do it. So I don't know. I wish that I could do it. I would like to be able to do it, but certainly I don't think I would ever do it. When I was younger, again, it was like I pulled stories out of the air. It was like they just came and hit me, and I often had full-blown intact stories just bang into my head, and I would just start writing them. I wrote all the time, constantly. And it's not that way anymore.
Yeah. Do you have more of those stories? Tim Davis, when we spoke with him, he was saying that these island books that he wrote, he had them in the attic for like 15 years. And so I'm wondering, do you have attic books that... Yes,
I have some, and some of them are actually published. I have one, I forget what it's called, because it doesn't sell. They don't sell. I can send you a list, but yeah, Earth Dreams has sold a couple, and the people who have read it love it. It's about a kid in a Christian school, and it's a little snarky. The humor's a little snarky, and his name is Bruce. I named him after my best friend Bruce, and he wins the Bible drill. He wins the Bible drill. He is really smart. He gets hit by a car in front of the other kids in the school. And when he wakes up, he's in a different place and it's a different world. And everybody's tall and they think he looks like a fox. They think he looks kind of shifty. And they call him Fox Face. He's the Fox Face boy. And then meanwhile, back in our world, his mother is arguing with this doctor because the doctor has got Bruce wired up to all this stuff, and he won't give her access to her son. And then another doctor who's an atheist, Dr. Sorensen is the bad guy. I forget the name of the good guy doctor. She sort of gets involved, and ultimately they decide that Sorensen is doing something. He's experimenting on Bruce, and meanwhile Bruce is still back in this world learning their language. And by the way, I wrote this way before Star Trek Next Generation ever came out, because BYU Press rejected this one for being too weird. He has all these adventures, and at the end, they steal his body from the hospital, and he actually starts to come back. A couple times he starts coming back, and by the end of his adventure, he realizes he is in the pre-flood world with the people who still worship God as much as they know God. But whenever when they talk and they say, like, there's the mantle, and they say the mantle will clear tonight and we'll see the lights of heaven, and they can like read the stars, and he tells them there will come a star when the Son of God will come, and they get like offended at that. Like, what do you mean that God's going to have a child like us? And he says, well, you don't understand, because they don't understand, because they're too early in the timeline. And then when he says that God's son will die, they get more offended, and they just say, they tell him, you can't understand this. You don't. And he stops arguing with them because he understands they don't have enough light to truly know. And that was what the BJU Press people said. No, they have to know. They got to know it all. And I told them they wouldn't know it all before the flood. They would know that God would redeem them, but they're not going to. They know that somebody's going to come and crush a serpent's head, but they're not going to know anything else. And they said no. And again, the book went the whole rounds. They couldn't just reject it outright because everybody wanted to read it. So they all would read the book, and then they would reject it. And that's called Earth Dreams. And that's out. And it did get good reviews from some test reviewers, but I don't have any means to advertise the books. It costs so much to advertise the books, and I just don't have that type of money. So Earth Dreams. And then I can't remember.
Can you tell me about the myth of the llama? I'm not familiar with that one.
With 3 books that a llama farmer wanted me to write. And the only one that made it back to publication after they totally failed for her, she gave me the rights back, and Del Thompson did do the cover for Myth of the Llama. It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
The book is inferior. It's, I would consider that's a book, a slapdash book I put out. If people read it, it doesn't bother me, but I don't think there's anything in the book. It's just, a boy has a fantasy adventure with a llama, and that's the story.
I love the review on Amazon. It says, I read this book as a kid. It's very fun children's fantasy with a lot of heart and imagination, and it's something unique too. How many fantasy books do you see about llamas? Right. As far as I know, this is the only one.
I think after that, Is Your Mama a Llama came out, but I think mine was first. So yeah, I'm glad. That's a nice review. It's a fun dash through fantasy, and especially if you read fantasy books, you see Baba Yaga shows up, but it's not. I don't think even in the writing style, it was my best writing style. I was in a hurry to get these books finished for her. Each one had to be 30,000 words, and so I was rushing, and I did it and got it out. So yeah, if you have the extra, I don't know what it costs, $9, $10, you can.
I think it's $7.98.
Okay, so about $8. I'll have to send this to you. I wrote one about a girl who is in an abusive. It's her uncle and aunt that are taking care of her, and her uncle is abusing her, and she shaves her head and masquerades as a boy. And it's her survival story as she's trying to get to her mother. And on the way to getting to her mother, she falls through the top of a cave, like a sinkhole that leads into a cave. And she's injured. And an Armenian woman pulls her out, Nala, and nurses her back to health. And there is a Christian, all through it, there's sort of like this Christian, the fittest. That's what it's called, the fittest. in several points of the story, as she's like, she has to steal from gardens and stuff. There's one point where she's in a shed and she can hear the people right on the other side of the shed, and I think it's a father and a son, and it's a very loving conversation of a father trying to lead his son, and she's, feeling this isolation, that she's completely cut off from the world, and she meets both mean people and kind people in this odyssey of hers, and then Nala takes her, and Nala is just horrified. Oh my goodness, you shaved off your hair. What were you thinking? What could be that bad? And then she tells her like the stuff her uncle was doing, and then Nala says, "Oh, the wicked man. Oh, he's so wicked." Like she just kind of fusses, but Nala has got a very strong sense of right and wrong, and she's an Armenian Holocaust survivor. And that, I think, if you've read the BJU reading books from having researched that story, and again, that novel was rejected by BJU Press because the girl dresses as a boy and passes as a boy, even though, again, Nala gives this complete, she doesn't really blame the girl. She just notes that this is what happens in a world filled with sin. And when the young girl again puts on women's clothes, even she feels like this is more appropriate. This is better. This is just a better way to live. And I guess I won't tell you the end. Obviously, her uncle is chasing after her, so I won't tell you the ending of the book, because that way nobody would buy the book and I'd stay this poor. So I won't tell you that. So, but yeah, The Fittest. I believe I published that. Maybe I didn't publish it. I did publish Earth Dreams. That's right. Maybe I didn't publish The Fittest. Maybe I need to. I don't know. So when publishing, publishing is now free. When I was in my 20s and 30s, it cost you a couple $1,000s at least to publish a book, and then you had no marketing. Now it's free. You just put that manuscript into Amazon and, it's free. So I have Steve and Joe was another series I wanted to do, where Steve is the cousin, Joe is a traditional, typical fundamentalist, and Steve is her atheist cousin who is brilliant. He's older. She's like 13 and he's 17 or 18. And every time he builds a contraption to do something that they need, it works, but it works the wrong way, which is kind of like the reflection of his atheism. So like in the beginning, the mom's complaining because she has real full hair and she can't get a blow dryer to work. So he builds her an in-counter blow dryer, but he puts the fan in backwards so it sucks her head down onto the countertop instead of blow drying her hair. So it's like that, like everything. But he's very protective of Joe, and he wants to. Joe's always getting into trouble, and he wants to help her, and he wants to be a good nephew to his aunt and uncle because his own parents don't care about him. So and I did write the first of that, but it's so outdated now because it was when the internet was new, and it relies too much on the internet being so new. Like the whole story would have to really be rewritten. And that, I talked with the people at BJU Press about that, but basically I was getting into young adult there, and they didn't want to cross that. Did they ever go into young adult? I don't think BJU Press has ever done young adult.
They had a few books. There was one that was about a girl who went into photography, and her mother had passed away and her dad was marrying someone new. Nye, Nye, that was the author of that one, I believe.
Oh, Julie Nye?
Yeah.
And who wrote Scout? Was that?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that she also wrote this one. I could be mistaken.
Well, I've got to tell you, Scout to me was the children's book of all that.
And Scout was really good. I love that book.
I spoke to a children's group, and the teacher said, "Which one of Jeri Massi's book is your favorite?" And they all yelled, "Scout!" I said, "Well, kids, I didn't write Scout." So I said, "But
I'll pass it on."
Then I'll pass that on to her, that she's your favorite.
Yeah.
So, but Scout was tremendous book.
It really was. I'll have to loan it to you, Amanda. It's really good.
So Julie Nye wrote this about the photography.
I believe so. Yeah, she was definitely a teenager. She was more like 16 and having more older girl emotions. I just remember that I wasn't allowed to read that one when I was younger. I had to wait until I was older to read it. So I feel like it was definitely over into the YA.
Okay, yeah, in the young adult, yeah.
For that. So you say that publishing is free with Amazon's print on demand now. So you have the rights to the rest of the Derwood books.
Yeah.
Tell us what you need. What is in the way of you publishing the rest of the series beyond book one? Is
right now
finding an illustrator or covers or both?
of course, right now, like I said, I have a mass on my liver, and I really
Mhm.
don't know, how long my life is going to be right now. I feel good. My digestion is good, but I just don't know because we don't know yet if it's cancer, and if it's cancer, how bad the cancer will be. So I need time, because what you end up having to do is you have to you buy a copy of the original book, and then you have to rip out all the pages and feed them through a PDF maker, and then
Right.
put them all together, convert them over to Word. Oh yeah, so I need Adobe. My Adobe ran out. I need the next and those are like $1,000. I mean, that's a lot of money. But the biggest thing is the illustrator. I need a cover illustrator, and I need interior art for interior art. And I say $2,000 per book. It's probably closer to three, and that would be the cheapest. Market rate is six. So
Mm.
these books don't make that much money. It is a losing bet for me to try to invest, and I couldn't even afford to do it. But I could start on them. I know that the first one, A Dangerous Game, has to be rewritten. It's too sad and it's too grim, so I want to have the same basic story, but I need to get it more in compliance with the rest of the books. It needs to.
No, 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 no. I liked how sad and grim it was because it fit for Scruggs' life.
For
Like,
Scruggs,
it was appropriate for Scruggs, and I felt like each of these books was a look into like how that
yes,
person's
into each,
life
yeah,
really was.
yeah,
And
how
so
Lord deals with each one of them.
don't put flowers and
No, I'm not going. No, it would still be the
moonlight.
same story, but it does need a little bit of lightness. Well, plus it's too short. It's
Yeah.
let's see. The ideal length is Courage by Darkness. That's the ideal length. And if you see the difference, it's just a little too short. Let's face it. If I'm going to charge people $9 or $10 for a book, because my books are expensive, I need to give them a full book. And
Mhm.
with the prices that I charge for the books, some of that is unavoidable because Amazon's engine, if the book is below a certain length, it's still going to be the same price as if it was up to a certain length. So I am looking at that, but I certainly wouldn't change A Dangerous Game significantly, but I just need to add a few more light touches to it. And the artwork, well, the artwork needs to change because I want a skinny Scruggs. Dell did this artwork and I was not happy with it. And he said, I'm tired of drawing skinny kids. We have fat kids in life. Get real, get used to it. Some kids are fat, overweight, heavy. But I always did imagine that Scruggs was like almost emaciated looking.
Yeah.
And
He definitely thinned down for
yeah,
Abandon.
yeah, because Dell did that. Dana did that one. Dana
Yeah.
did that cover. So if you wanted a pudgier kid, Jack was and Jack in Derwood is rounder. And I did
Yeah.
think that Jack would be more that way. Yes, you see this, pudgy kid, and that is Jack. Jack is easygoing. He loves
Yeah.
the good things in life. And I feel like
Love
that
hot
did
chocolate.
fit Jack, but it didn't fit Scruggs.
They love hot chocolate and soft pretzels, and that would
Yes.
be chubby too.
Yeah, a diet of soft pretzels and hot chocolate will bulk you up. Yes.
Yeah.
So but yeah, it's the cost. The cost in total to redo these, it's five after Derwood. It's five additional books. So we're talking about $12,000 to $15,000, and that's even a lot for a GoFundMe. Like I thought, do Kickstarter, but what could I give to people? All I could give them is copies of the books. I could sign them, and so that is really what's in the way. And we'll just have to see if the Lord will, open that door. But I also have to tell you, it is very time consuming.
Yeah.
It would take me, well, like a Christmas vacation. Over a Christmas vacation, I could bring these, back. And I am very touched and so honored that people, again, after 40 years or 35 years, people want these books. And I do want people to have them, but I don't know how to come up with $15,000. And I have willed my books to a person who loves my books. But I don't know how she would find the time, even if she had the money. This is, again, for me, this is just such an uncertain time. I won't know probably for a few more weeks whether I have cancer or not, what's going to happen. And yeah, I'd love to leave the world with the benefit of my opinion on everything in my books. I would love to do that. So I don't know what to ask of people at this point. If you have any wealthy viewers and they say, "Oh, $15,000, that's pocket change. Here, have 15," I'd take it and I would dedicate it to the use of getting the artwork. But for the artwork, I want Dell or Dana Thompson. I do, and I know Dell is still doing art. Dana actually works for a company that produces cartoons and stickers. Last I heard, he may be retired. So I don't know if Dana even sits down and does artwork anymore, or if it's of benefit to him in any way to do artwork. Like, I don't know. But I have to tell you, good illustrators are hard to find. They are very, very, and when I opened up the Crown and Jewel book for illustrators, I didn't even get a lot of entries, but there are people who can do beautiful landscapes, but they can't do animals. And there are people who can do landscapes and animals, but they can't do people. And there are people who can do landscapes, animals, and people, but they can't do hands. The hardest thing, hands. So when you want a cover illustration that is like this quality, I mean, that's an excellent cover illustration.
Yeah.
You need an illustrator who can do landscapes, animals, people, hands, faces, perspective, everything. But children expect artwork. They expect four pieces, at least four. And in Derwood we had a lot more, I think 12. So that's the plan. So do you have a solution? Are either of you artists by any chance?
No.
I'm not, but we will definitely be thinking about it and praying about it and asking the Lord to open some doors for getting this whole series back, because I think that it really touched a whole generation, and I think that it can just as well touch another generation.
Thank you. I hope so. I mean,
the 15-year-old has read through all of the ones that I have. There's a couple of the series that I don't have, and she thought that we only were missing one until she saw the picture that I put on Facebook of all the covers, and she's like, "We're missing 2 of them." And I'm like, "I know. Tell me about it. This is the bane of my existence in my library."
Well, you can't find them on Ex Libris, or
they're like $80.
Oh, right, yeah, they charge quite
like people that loved the books are holding on to their copies, and so they just aren't coming up for resale. So people, I just get so frustrated with people that are like, "Oh, I found mine for 50 cents." I'm like, "Well, good for you."
And it's in brand new condition too.
I know.
Yeah.
It's like, why don't you just brag a little about it? Just teasing. So we'll be praying about getting those books back in, and I'm just going to keep recommending them to people for when they do find them out there for 50 cents. I want them to know to grab them.
Yes, yeah. They can get them that cheap. They could probably resell them on Amazon for at least $9 or $10, and make a real profit. But it is telling about the state of commercial Christian fiction that these books still hold up, because we don't have enough Christian fiction. I mean, let's face it. I stopped writing Peabody series by the time I was 28. That was as mature as my writing got, and yet people are still reading them and recommending them to their children.
Yes.
Because
I feel like
there's not anything. Again, we're stuck in a rut of trying to present perfect children in books being read by imperfect children, and you have to show the imperfections. The Christian audience is a difficult audience, and sadly a lot of Christian fiction is poof. It's drivel. It's Of course, I
agree. I was really we did Bob Jones' curriculum until 3rd grade, and then we switched over to Abeka. But we always bought the books. Like every year at Christmas, they were on sale. I think like $5.
You mean the reading books?
Yeah, the like your books.
Oh, okay, the novels. Okay.
Yeah, the light line books. And so my parents, that was something I was really grateful for, was they always bought us these books for Christmas. And so I read through the majority of them. And then after I got older and moved out and started like going to the Christian bookstore, I realized what a treasure trove they had been, because the stuff at the Christian bookstore was kind of just garbage. Like it wasn't worth my time or effort, and it just didn't tell a good story. And then over the years, I've just been really disappointed that I haven't really been finding that. And so I was really grateful when Andrew Peterson wrote the Wingfeather Saga, because that's beautiful fiction, and it's not blatantly Christian, but it's very clearly all the tenets of the Christian faith and resurrection stories. And then Sam Smith, he wrote the Green Ember series, and those are very faith-filled and good, clean fantasy fun. But then he and his son Josiah just wrote a book that's releasing in November, and it's called Jack
Jack
Zulu,
Zulu.
and it's so good. Like, it gives me hope for the
Oh,
future of
good. I hope so. Yes, I
it
hope so.
has what you were talking about kids that are already Christians, just living their Christian faith. And
Yes, yeah.
it is fantasy. It's very clearly fantasy. Like, there's traveling amongst realms and things of that nature. But these are just like good, strong Christian kids walking out their faith and relying on it in the troubles that they hit. And I'm really excited to see where this series goes.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's not a lot. So I think that the the good stuff from the 90s can just be tweaked a little and edited to make it just as current for now. And
Right. Yeah. You just need to update. Yeah, and all the books need to. And I even up. I mean, I updated the Bridge, Crown and Jewel. In Crown and Jewel, she got a dog that she gave away. Now I have dogs. I changed that. She doesn't give the dog away. She keeps the dog because you know who would give away a dog? And so yeah, there was some. I did a little bit of tweaking, and obviously because your writing style matures and you see things and you know you put in fixes. And in Derwood, I don't know that you're going to want to put this in your podcast because some of your readers may be upset, but I removed spanking. I just
Oh, that's so good to hear because
Amanda brought that up
I brought that
yesterday.
up. I was like, it has spanking in it.
I was like, I don't even remember that. And then she like sent me screen grabs, and we were going to talk to you. We were going to be like, could you take that out, please?
they made me put it in because you can't raise your kids like a Christian unless you hit them, and so they wanted me to acknowledge that it's one of the places where Jack. I think it's the one place where Jack lies or something, and Penny just says Dad spanked him. And then when I read that, I thought, you know, I got to tell you, I can't say I've never had children. So, yeah, I've also never been married. So let me give you my advice on marriage and children, right? So I have to say, I can understand if you're a parent and you have a child who deliberately bullies another child in the family. Because I had friends, their 4-year-old would just smack their 2-year-old. And the mom was just like, she didn't know what to do. So she would spank her. Okay, I get that. Like, maybe, I don't know, maybe if I were wiser, I wouldn't do that, or maybe I would do that and say that's the only thing you
can
can
I speak to that? So I grew up in a home that spanked regularly. And when I grew up, I'd read all the parenting books that the Christian body was putting out. And that was the tool in my toolbox. Like, I thought you spanked your kids.
Mhm.
Eric was not spanked growing up, but he was willing to accept the fact that I had done all the research and this was something I felt strongly about. So much to my great sorrow, we spanked our eldest daughter. And not frequently, definitely not in the way that I had grown up, but like that was the thing that we resorted to if we thought she, you know, we couldn't think, if I didn't know what else to do because I didn't have other tools in my toolbox yet, right? Because they don't teach you other things.
Right.
Like there's always this, you know, you can do X, Y, and Z, but if it gets to this point, there's nothing else and you have to spank them. And when I decided to stop spanking, I went to Canadian authors because it's illegal to spank your kids in Canada. And I was like, they clearly don't have that point. They don't have that point where they're like, if they get to this point, you have to spank them. I'm like, I want to know what to do here.
Okay.
I want to know what to do at this point. And so I found a book called Discipline Without Distress, and it just changed our lives. But Eric and I had been doing a ton of research and studying the Bible and God's word and looking at, you know, the verses about like the rod of correction and all the things that they throw at you and realizing like a shepherd doesn't use his rod to hit his sheep. He uses his rod to guide his sheep, and the sheep trust the rod and feel safe around it. And you don't feel safe around something that's hitting you. And so we had our second child. And what was really pivotal for us is Gemma was born with sensory processing disorder. And so if she tried to reach for an outlet and we slapped her hand, she couldn't feel it. Like she would look at us like, did you just swipe at me? Like, I'm not really sure what just happened here. And we realized like, if we wanted her to feel it, we would have to hit her to a point that it would very clearly be abusive. And we weren't doing that. So we were just like, well, what do we do? And that's when we started like researching and saying like, is this a biblical thing really? Or is this just what we were told was? And where was I? Oh, so the first thing after we had stopped spanking Inara for a month, we told Eric's parents, you know, oh, just by the way, we stopped spanking the kids. And my father-in-law said, I could tell because Inara doesn't hit Gemma anymore.
Oh,
like, oh, you're right. Like her aggressions towards her younger
hitting
sibling
teaches hitting. Yeah.
vanished. When we stopped hitting her, she stopped hitting Gemma. And that's one thing I will say for my kids. Like I have, you know, kids on the spectrum and they're just a little extra sometimes, but they don't hit each other. Like we've never had violence against siblings as an issue because that's not something that's been modeled for them, which is just a
Well,
huge
so
thing
yeah.
for us.
So that being said, I decided whatever Jack did in the story, he told a lie, and in the end, the bed broke, or something fell on the bed and broke the bed. It didn't merit a spanking in anybody's book, and so I just took it out. And
Oh.
I did think, I don't think spanking is this big necessary thing. And yeah, I have a lot of doubts about it. And hearing you say that just makes a lot of sense. Like I said, I don't have children. I'm 62. I don't think I'll ever have children, and so.
Yeah.
Except the children who I have in Christ, who I'm responsible to.
So I'm actually looking at the text right here of when you had spanking in the book, because Amanda sent me screen grabs.
Oh, okay.
So it's in chapter 8, Things That Never Happened to Amy Bell. And it says, Dad spanked us both for what we did. We saw it coming as soon as we walked into Sergeant McKenna's living room and heard the story. In his eyes, the worst was that we weren't sorry, and that always merits a spanking in our family. But they were right. Like, they were right to not be sorry. It was a misunderstanding. And that was one of the big things that got Eric and I talking about, like, is spanking even the right choice? Was we were realizing that a lot of times when our first inclination would be to spank Inara, if we stopped and talked with her for like an extra 15 minutes, we often realized that there was a miscommunication going on, and that her intention was not one that warranted a spanking. It warranted education and training of just conversing with her and letting her know what life was like. And in this one, like, Jack and Penny did not deserve a spanking in that situation. They had done the right thing, maybe the wrong way, but like, their intentions were good. They did not need to be sorry.
Well, they stole a mattress, and I think, again, the idea of the people who said they had to be spanked was no matter what, stealing the mattress was wrong, which I see that. But again, I don't look at this. If you have two ditzy kids who think that the people at the mattress store are international spies, you really need to sit down and have a talk with them. But to resort to spanking,
Jack had to pay for it. Like, that's my thought. Like, Jack paid for it. That seems like proper restitution, and the spanking is just this bonus,
right?
People throw on because.
Well, I took it out. It's out now, so I took it out of the story.
It's
and
good to hear that you took
and I think that's the only place. But I have to say that in that culture, hitting is such a first resort, and again, I'm a 4th degree black belt. I've learned all about, I can hit anything any way you want, even now when I'm older. And I have to say that you really learn that once you start getting in the higher levels of martial arts. If you hit, you're gonna get hit. Like, if you eventually realize, it's so interesting that what hitting accomplishes is a temporary fix, but you've just made the problem worse. You do actually learn that once you're, in a higher level of martial arts and you're reading the history of what has gone on with martial arts and martial study, that violence never actually solves the problem. It's a stopgap. And sometimes, you have to, the guy's drunk and waving a sword around, so you clunk him one, but he's still got a drinking problem and he's still got a sword. So you've got to solve those problems now. And that's the issue.
It's really good to hear that you didn't want it in there in the first place, because it seemed out of place. It seemed like
that's definitely an editorial inclusion.
So it seemed like they actually had more constructive methods of discipline otherwise, except for that weird random spank.
Yeah. Well, we appreciate that. And I just want to acknowledge for our listeners that we understand that it's a very heated topic, and that people are at different places in their journey and different life experiences. But we do encourage you to look into gentle parenting and some study of the rod of correction as a tool of comfort instead of a tool of reproach.
And I will add to your Bible commentary on that, wherever the Bible says to, whip the lad, whip the boy, whip a child, it's always in the masculine. It's always talking about a male. So the Bible never tells you to hit a daughter. And it's always talking about a lad, not a 2-year-old child or a 4-year-old child. And if we read the Old Testament, we see what these lads got up to: raping neighbors, setting neighbors' crops on fire. This is really what Solomon is talking about. And all of those verses only come from Proverbs, which, again, when we don't see anything in the Torah, the 5 books of the law, which are the weightiest books of the Old Testament. We don't see anything in the major prophets or minor prophets saying you need to get out there and hit your kids. It's all Solomon, who had all these wives and all these kids that he wasn't raising, and it's only proverbial, which means it's not really a command. It's a proverb. It's something that people are supposed to sit around and talk about, but they're always directed basically at what we would call hoodlums, not your 5 or 6 year old who spills their milk or doesn't know their homework. It's not that. It's and again, people with violent natures and violent inclinations. That's the only thing I can say is they read it through their own violence and then they make it part of their violent culture, but it is really not fitting. And again, if you look at Jewish families, they don't beat their children. They don't. It's not in their culture to do that. They love their children. So yeah. So yeah, I think that was a little bit of some of the error that we learned growing up in that culture.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jeri. It was really nice talking about these books, and we really hope to be seeing more of the Peabody series coming back into print.
I hope so. I do hope so.
We're glad that the Bracken trilogy is available to buy, and we will be linking all of these books that we've talked about in the show notes. And we appreciate everybody's time listening, and we hope that some of these harder topics have just gotten you thinking about some different things and an ability to see into somebody else's experience. And that's what this is about. It's about our stories and where they come from, and stories are truer than true. Have a good week.